The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez carefully disassembled the Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, as she cleaned each component with the dedication of someone who understood that lives depended on perfect maintenance. The weapon gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the armory, and Sarah worked in complete silence, lost in the familiar rhythm of her task. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the doorway, initially impressed by her thoroughness. Sarah had been assigned to the base weapons maintenance division just 3 weeks ago, and her work was flawless. Every rifle, every pistol, every piece of equipment that passed through her hands emerged in pristine condition. But something about the way she handled the Barrett caught his attention today. Her fingers moved with an intimacy that spoke of more than training. This wasn't the careful respect of a maintenance technician learning to handle an unfamiliar weapon. This was the fluid confidence of someone who had spent countless hours with this exact rifle, who knew its weight, its balance, its quirks as well as she knew her own heartbeat. Morrison stepped into the armory, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. Sarah didn't look up from her work, but he noticed the slight tension that crept into her shoulders. She continued cleaning the barrel with steady strokes, but there was something different now, a wariness that hadn't been there moments before. The Barrett .50 was not a weapon that ordinary soldiers handled regularly. It was a specialized tool, used primarily by elite snipers in the most demanding situations. The fact that Sarah could field strip it blindfolded suggested a level of familiarity that didn't match her personnel file. Morrison had read her background when she arrived. Former Army, discharged after 8 years of service, exemplary record in logistics and supply management. No mention of sniper training. No indication that she had ever been anywhere near special operations. Yet here she was, handling a weapon that most soldiers would struggle to assemble correctly, working with the kind of muscle memory that came only from extensive field experience. As Sarah reached for the cleaning rod, Morrison noticed something else. A small scar on the back of her left hand, barely visible but unmistakably the mark of a scope burn. It was the kind of injury that happened when a sniper fired too many rounds too quickly. When the hot scope kissed the skin during rapid target acquisition, it was a mark that spoke of combat, of pressure, of situations where speed mattered more than comfort. The pieces weren't adding up. Sarah Martinez was supposed to be a logistics specialist with a clean, unremarkable service record, but the woman in front of him moved like a predator, thought like a tactician, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen serious action. Morrison decided to test his theory. He picked up a scope from the equipment rack, a high-end piece of gear that required precise calibration. Without saying a word, he set it down next to the rifle components. Sarah glanced at it briefly, then continued her cleaning routine, but Morrison caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the way her gaze lingered just a fraction too long on the adjustment knobs. Most maintenance personnel would have ignored the scope or asked for instructions on how to properly clean it. Sarah did neither. Instead, she finished cleaning the rifle barrel, then picked up the scope with the same practiced ease. Her hands found the adjustment points immediately, and she began the delicate process of internal cleaning with movements that spoke of intimate familiarity. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just familiarity with equipment. This was the kind of knowledge that came from depending on this gear in life or death situations. Sarah Martinez might have been listed as a logistics specialist, but she handled weapons like someone who had used them professionally, extensively, and recently. The question that burned in Morrison's mind was simple but troubling. If Sarah Martinez wasn't who her file said she was, then who was she really? And more importantly, what was someone with her apparent skills doing in a routine maintenance position on his base? He watched as she reassembled the rifle with mechanical precision, each component sliding into place with barely a sound. When she finished, she set the weapon down gently and finally looked up at him. For just a moment, Morrison saw something in her eyes that confirmed his suspicions. It was the look of someone who had been behind a scope when it mattered. Someone who understood the weight of the trigger in ways that went far beyond technical specifications. Sarah Martinez was hiding something significant, and Commander Morrison intended to find out what it was. The safety of his base, his mission, and his people might depend on uncovering the truth about the woman who cleaned weapons like a professional and carried secrets like shadows. Commander Morrison spent the next 3 days conducting discreet inquiries about Sarah Martinez. Her service record appeared legitimate on the surface, but the more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. Her deployment history showed she had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan for 2 years, supposedly managing supply chains for a logistics unit. But when Morrison reached out to contacts who had served there during the same period, none of them remembered a Sarah Martinez in logistics. What made the situation more intriguing was that Chapman had been home to one of the most active sniper units in the region during exactly the time frame when Sarah was supposedly there. The unit had been involved in some of the most sensitive operations of the war, providing overwatch for Special Forces missions and conducting long-range reconnaissance in hostile territory. Morrison decided to dig deeper into the personnel records, using his security clearance to access more detailed files. What he found made him pause. There were gaps in Sarah's service record, periods of time marked only as special assignment with no additional details. These weren't the kind of assignments given to logistics personnel. During lunch in the officers' mess, Morrison casually brought up Sarah's name to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been at the base longer than anyone. Rodriguez was the kind of veteran who noticed everything and forgot nothing, and his reaction was immediate and telling. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, setting down his coffee cup. "Interesting woman. Showed up here 3 weeks ago, keeps to herself mostly. But I'll tell you something strange, Commander. Yesterday I was running inventory in the advanced training area, and I found her there during off hours. She said she was checking equipment for maintenance schedules, but she was standing in the exact spot where we positioned shooters for our 1,000-yard qualification course." Morrison felt his suspicions crystallizing. "Did she say anything else?" "Not much, but when she walked away I noticed she naturally moved in a tactical crouch. Not the kind of movement you learn in a supply depot, if you know what I mean. Plus, she had this way of scanning the area that reminded me of the contractors we used to work with, the quiet professionals." That afternoon, Morrison arranged for Sarah to be assigned to a special project that would require her to work late in the armory. He positioned himself where he could observe without being seen, wanting to watch her when she thought she was alone. What he witnessed confirmed his worst fears and his growing respect. Sarah didn't just clean the weapons, she tested them. She checked the action of each rifle, examined the trigger mechanisms with the critical eye of someone who understood the difference between acceptable and optimal performance. When she thought no one was looking, she shouldered each weapon briefly, checking the balance and sight alignment with movements that spoke of extensive training. But it was what happened next that truly shocked Morrison. Sarah pulled out her personal cell phone and took several detailed photographs of the weapon's serial numbers and specifications. She was documenting the base's arsenal, and she was doing it with the methodical precision of a professional intelligence gatherer. Morrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Was Sarah Martinez a foreign operative? Was she gathering intelligence for an enemy nation? Or was there something else going on? Something that might explain her deception without making her a threat. He decided to confront her directly but carefully. The next morning he entered the armory while Sarah was working on a standard M4 rifle. Instead of his usual casual observation, he approached her workstation and picked up her maintenance log. "Your work is exceptional," he said, watching her reaction carefully. "I've been in the military for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone clean weapons with your level of precision. Where did you learn these techniques?" Sarah looked up from the rifle, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she met his gaze directly. Morrison saw something shift in her expression, a calculation happening behind her eyes. "Army training, sir," she said simply, but her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Morrison nodded slowly, then picked up the Barrett 50 that Sarah had cleaned the day before. "This is a specialized weapon," he said conversationally. "Most soldiers never even see one up close. Have you ever fired one of these?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah's hand stilled on the M4, and Morrison could see her weighing her options. She could continue the deception, or she could trust him with whatever truth she was hiding. "Yes, sir," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have." Morrison felt a mixture of vindication and concern wash over him. Sarah Martinez was finally admitting to experience she wasn't supposed to have, but her confession raised far more questions than it answered. If she was qualified to use a Barrett 50, then her entire personnel file was a lie, The question was whether that lie was designed to protect her or to deceive him. Morrison closed the armory door and activated the security lock, ensuring their conversation would remain private. Sarah's admission had changed everything, and he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. She stood perfectly still, her hands resting on the partially disassembled rifle, but her posture had shifted into something more alert, more ready. "Sarah," Morrison said, using her first name deliberately, "I need you to understand that I'm not your enemy here, but I have a base full of people whose safety is my responsibility, and your personnel file doesn't match what I've observed. I need the truth." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the rifle's receiver. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had been carrying secrets for far too long. "My real name is Sarah Elena Vasquez," she began slowly. "Martinez is my mother's maiden name. I've been using it since I left the service because my real identity is classified at levels that don't officially exist." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. "Go on." "I was recruited out of basic training by a joint task force that operated between CIA, Special Operations Command, and a group that doesn't have a public name. They identified soldiers with specific skill sets and psychological profiles for long-term deep cover operations. I spent 6 years as a sniper and intelligence gatherer, in places that the United States government has never officially acknowledged having personnel." The pieces began falling into place in Morrison's mind. The weapon expertise, the tactical awareness, the gaps in her service record, even her ability to disappear into a routine maintenance role. Sarah hadn't just been a sniper, she had been a ghost. "Chapman was real," Sarah continued, "but I wasn't there as logistic support. I was part of a 2-person sniper team conducting surveillance and elimination missions against high-value targets. My partner and I spent 14 months in the mountains, providing overwatch for operations that needed to remain completely deniable." Morrison studied her face, looking for signs of deception but finding only the hollow look of someone recounting traumatic experiences. "What happened to your partner?" Sarah's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the rifle. "Marcus Chen. He was the best spotter I ever worked with, could read wind patterns like a weather satellite. We were covering an extraction operation when everything went wrong. Taliban forces had been tracking our position for weeks, and they set up an ambush using the extraction as bait." She paused, her breathing becoming slightly irregular. Morrison recognized the signs of someone reliving combat trauma. "Marcus took a round through the chest while calling in our position. I had maybe 30 seconds to provide covering fire for the extraction team while maintaining our concealment. I made shots that night that I still dream about, distances that should have been impossible with the equipment we had. But Marcus didn't make it out." Morrison felt a chill as he began to understand the weight of what Sarah had experienced. The official records show that Marcus Chen died in a vehicle accident during a routine supply run. I was listed as being on medical leave for a back injury that never happened. The mission we were covering never officially occurred, and the targets we eliminated never officially existed. That's how these operations work, Commander. Success and failure both disappear into classified files that will never see daylight. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Morrison was processing not just Sarah's confession, but the implications of having someone with her background and training on his base. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. "Why take a maintenance position when you clearly have skills that could be utilized elsewhere?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Because those skills come with a psychological cost that the military doesn't like to acknowledge. After Marcus died, I spent another 18 months in the field before the mission commanders decided I was showing signs of operational stress. They offered me a choice: accept a medical discharge with full benefits and a cover identity, or risk a psychological evaluation that might have led to involuntary commitment." Morrison was beginning to understand the complexity of Sarah's situation. She wasn't a security risk. She was a highly trained operative trying to build a normal life after years of classified service that had taken everything from her. "The maintenance work," Sarah continued, "it's therapeutic in a way, working with weapons that I'm not required to fire at human beings. Being around military personnel without the pressure of life or death decisions. I thought maybe I could find some peace here, contribute something positive for once." Morrison found himself facing a decision that would affect both Sarah's future and the security of his base. He had uncovered a truth that was far more complex than he had anticipated, and Sarah's confession had revealed not a threat, but a person trying to heal from experiences that most people couldn't even imagine. "The photographs you were taking," Morrison said. Remembering what he had observed, Sarah nodded. "Force of habit. In the field, you document everything because intelligence might be the difference between mission success and disaster. I know it looks suspicious, and I should have asked permission. Old habits from a life I'm trying to leave behind." Morrison realized that Sarah Vasquez represented something unique, a highly skilled operative who wanted nothing more than to serve quietly and anonymously. The question now was whether he could find a way to honor her sacrifice while utilizing her capabilities in a way that might help her heal rather than traumatize her further. Morrison spent the weekend researching Sarah's story through his intelligence contacts. Every detail she had provided checked out, though most of the information was buried so deep in classified files that it took his highest-level clearances to access. The joint task force she described had indeed existed, operating under a classification level that required special congressional oversight. More importantly, the psychological profiles of operatives who had served in similar roles painted a picture that matched Sarah's behavior perfectly. On Monday morning, Morrison made a decision that would change both their careers. Instead of reporting Sarah's deception through official channels, he requested a private meeting with his superior, General Patricia Hayes. Hayes was known for her pragmatic approach to personnel issues and her understanding of the unique challenges faced by special operations veterans. Morrison presented Sarah's case carefully, emphasizing her skills, her psychological state, and the potential value she could bring to the base's training programs. He argued that Sarah represented an opportunity to enhance their sniper training, curriculum with real-world expertise that couldn't be found in textbooks or standard military doctrine. General Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally asking pointed questions about Sarah's mental state and security clearance status. When Morrison finished his presentation, Hayes was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the complex factors involved. "Commander Morrison," Hayes finally said, "what you're describing is highly irregular. This woman has essentially been living under false pretenses on our base, regardless of her reasons. However, I'm inclined to agree with your assessment that she represents an asset rather than a liability." Hayes activated her secure communication system and placed a call to someone Morrison couldn't identify. The conversation was brief and conducted in the kind of military shorthand that suggested both parties understood the classified nature of the subject. "Better. Sarah Vasquez has friends in very high places," Hayes said after ending the call. "Her service record, the real one, is extraordinary. She's credited with eliminating 17 high-value targets and providing intelligence that prevented multiple terrorist attacks against American forces. The reason she's been allowed to maintain her cover identity is that there are still people looking for her." Morrison felt a new level of respect and concern for Sarah. Revenge? Professional courtesy, you might say. Some of the targets she eliminated had connections to organized crime networks that extend far beyond terrorism. Keeping her identity buried isn't just about operational security. It's about keeping her alive. Hayes stood and walked to her window, looking out at the training grounds where young Marines were learning the basics of marksmanship. "I'm going to approve an unusual arrangement, Commander. Sarah Vasquez will be transferred to a new position as a civilian contractor, specializing in advanced marksmanship training. Her cover identity will be maintained, but she'll be working in a capacity that utilizes her skills appropriately." Morrison felt relief and anticipation. "What kind of training program?" "We've been losing too many good snipers to inadequate preparation," Hayes explained. "The current curriculum teaches the mechanics of long-range shooting, but it doesn't address the psychological and tactical realities that operatives face in the field. Sarah's experience could bridge that gap." Hayes turned back to Morrison. "However, there are conditions. Sarah's psychological evaluation must be updated quarterly by a specialist familiar with special operations trauma. Any signs of deterioration, any indication that the training role is exacerbating her stress, and she'll be transferred to a medical facility for comprehensive treatment." Morrison nodded his understanding. "And her security status? Her cover identity will be maintained, but her access will be upgraded to allow her to work with classified training materials. She'll essentially be operating in a gray area between her official identity and her real capabilities. That afternoon, Morrison called Sarah to his office. She entered with the careful posture of someone who expected the worst, but was prepared for anything. Morrison gestured for her to sit, then explained the new arrangement that had been approved. Sarah's reaction was complex. Relief, gratitude, and anxiety played across her features as she processed what Morrison was telling her. The opportunity to use her skills in a constructive way was clearly appealing, but the idea of returning to any role connected to sniper operations brought back memories she was still struggling to process. "I'm not sure I'm ready to teach others how to do what I did," Sarah said quietly. "The responsibility of training someone who might end up in the same situations I faced, knowing what it costs mentally and emotionally." Morrison leaned forward. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job, Sarah. Current training programs don't address those costs. They send young soldiers into the field with technical skills, but no understanding of the psychological reality they'll face. You could change that." Sarah was quiet for a long time, considering the implications. Teaching others about the realities of combat sniping meant confronting her own experiences rather than trying to bury them. It was potentially therapeutic, but it was also potentially re-traumatizing. There would be safeguards, Morrison continued. Regular psychological evaluations, the ability to step away from the program if it becomes too much, and support from medical personnel who understand what you've been through. Sarah finally looked up at him. Marcus always said that the best way to honor the dead was to make sure their sacrifice taught the living how to survive. Maybe this is what he would have wanted. Morrison saw the moment when Sarah made her decision, and he recognized it as the first step in what might be a long journey toward healing. 3 months into her new role as advanced marksmanship instructor, Sarah had transformed the base's sniper training program beyond recognition. Her classes were unlike anything the military had seen before, combining technical precision with psychological preparation that addressed the mental challenges of combat shooting. Word of her innovative methods had spread through military channels, and the base was receiving requests from other units to send their personnel for training. Sarah's approach was revolutionary in its honesty. Instead of the traditional focus on mechanics and accuracy, she spent equal time teaching students about the psychological aftermath of taking a life, the weight of responsibility that came with precision weapons, and the importance of mental health maintenance during and after deployment. Her first group of 12 students included experienced Marines who thought they knew everything about long-range shooting. Within the first week, Sarah had completely reconstructed their understanding of what it meant to be a sniper. She taught them to think like hunters rather than soldiers, to understand their environment as a living system, rather than a static backdrop for shooting exercises. The breakthrough moment came during a night training exercise. Sarah had set up a complex scenario that required students to identify and eliminate multiple targets while maintaining concealment and communication with support units. The exercise was designed to replicate the kind of pressure and complexity they would face in actual combat situations. Private First Class Jennifer Walsh, a young Marine from Texas with exceptional shooting skills, had been struggling with the psychological aspects of the training. During the exercise, she had a clear shot at her primary target, but hesitated when Sarah introduced a complication: civilian movement in the target area that required split-second decision-making. When Walsh froze on the trigger, unable to take the shot because of uncertainty about civilian safety, some of the other students criticized her hesitation. Sarah immediately stopped the exercise and gathered the entire group. "Private Walsh just demonstrated the most important skill a sniper can possess," Sarah announced, her voice carrying across the training ground. She chose not to take a shot when she wasn't certain of the consequences. In real combat, that kind of judgment saves lives and prevents the psychological trauma that comes from making the wrong decision under pressure. Sarah then shared something she had never told anyone before. "I once had a target in my scope, a confirmed hostile who had been responsible for multiple attacks against American forces. I had the shot, perfect conditions, no wind, stable platform. But at the last second I saw a child run into my line of fire. I held the shot, even though it meant the target escaped and my mission was technically a failure." The students listened with rapt attention as Sarah continued. 3 weeks later, intelligence confirmed that the target had been carrying his own child when I had him in my scope. The child I saw running wasn't just any kid. It was his son. If I had taken that shot, I would have killed both father and child, and I would have spent the rest of my life knowing that my impatience had killed an innocent. The story had a profound impact on the students, but it also marked a turning point for Sarah herself. Speaking about her experiences, sharing the lessons she had learned through trauma and loss, was helping her process emotions she had been suppressing for years. Morrison observed this transformation with growing admiration. Sarah was not just teaching technical skills. She was fundamentally changing how the military approached the psychological preparation of combat snipers. Her students were learning to be more effective, not just because they could shoot more accurately, but because they understood the complete context of their role. The success of Sarah's program attracted the attention of military psychologists and training specialists from across the armed forces. Dr. Amanda Chen, a specialist in combat trauma who had worked extensively with special operations personnel, requested permission to study Sarah's methods and their psychological impact on students. Dr. Chen's preliminary findings were remarkable. Students who completed Sarah's training showed significantly lower rates of post-deployment psychological stress related to combat actions. They were better prepared mentally for the realities of their role and had coping strategies that helped them maintain their psychological health even in high-stress situations. But the success of the program also brought unwanted attention. Sarah's reputation as an instructor was growing, and with it came curiosity about her background and experience. Military personnel from other bases wanted to know where this extraordinary instructor had come from and how they could access similar training for their own units. Morrison found himself in the position of protecting Sarah's cover identity while promoting her innovative methods. It was a delicate balance that required careful coordination with higher command levels and continuous monitoring of Sarah's psychological state. During one of their regular check-ins, Sarah expressed concerns about the growing attention her program was receiving. "Commander," she said, "I'm worried that the success of this training is going to make it impossible to maintain my cover identity. People are asking questions about my background that I can't answer without revealing classified information." Morrison had been anticipating this problem. "We've been working on a solution. General Hayes has approved the creation of a new classification level for your position that will allow us to acknowledge your advanced training without revealing the specific details of your service record." Sarah looked skeptical. "How does that work?" "Officially, you'll be listed as a former special operations contractor with classified experience in overseas training operations. It's technically true while being vague enough to protect the details that need to remain secret." The solution allowed Sarah to continue her work while maintaining the security of her real identity, but it also represented another step away from the quiet anonymity she had originally sought. Sarah Elena Vasquez was slowly re-emerging from the shadows, and with that emergence came both opportunities and risks that neither she nor Morrison had fully anticipated. 2 years after her first encounter with Commander Morrison in the armory, Sarah Vasquez had become one of the most respected training specialists in the United States military. Her program had been officially adopted by Special Operations Command and was being implemented at bases across the country. More importantly, her innovative approach to combining technical training with psychological preparation had saved lives and prevented countless cases of combat-related mental health issues. The transformation in Sarah herself was equally remarkable. The hollow-eyed woman who had hidden behind maintenance schedules and cleaning routines had evolved into a confident instructor who had found a way to honor her fallen partner while helping others avoid the psychological pitfalls that had nearly destroyed her own life. Dr. Chen's comprehensive study of Sarah's training methods had been published in military psychology journals and was being studied by allied nations interested in improving their own sniper training programs. The research showed that students who completed Sarah's course were not only more effective in combat situations, but also significantly more resilient psychologically. Morrison, who had been promoted to colonel in recognition of his innovative personnel management, often reflected on the decision he had made that day in the armory. Taking a risk on Sarah Vasquez had not only benefited his base but had contributed to a fundamental shift in how the military approached specialized training. The success story, however, was not without its complications. Sarah's growing reputation had eventually attracted the attention of some of the same networks that had necessitated her cover identity in the first place. Intelligence agencies reported increased chatter about attempts to identify and locate the sniper, responsible for several high-profile eliminations in Afghanistan and other classified locations. The solution came from an unexpected source. General Hayes, now promoted to oversee special operations training for the entire Pacific region, proposed that Sarah be given a new official identity that acknowledged her skills while completely disconnecting her from her classified service record. The program would create a fictional but documented background that explained her capabilities without revealing the specific operations she had conducted. Sarah would become officially known as a former competitive shooter who had transitioned into military contracting and training. Her documented experience would include civilian marksmanship competitions, law enforcement training, and generic overseas security work. The new identity would be supported by created records that were detailed enough to withstand scrutiny while protecting the classified nature of her real service. The transition to her new official identity coincided with another significant development in Sarah's life. She had begun a relationship with Captain David Rodriguez, a Marine psychologist who had been working with her program to develop better support systems for combat veterans. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding of the psychological challenges faced by military personnel. Rodriguez understood Sarah's background without needing to know the specific details. His own experience working with special operations personnel had given him insight into the kind of trauma she had experienced, and his professional training helped him provide the emotional support she needed to continue healing. The day Sarah officially received her new identity documents was both liberating and bittersweet. She was finally free to live openly as someone who possessed the skills she had actually developed, but she was also formally saying goodbye to the woman who had served her country in the shadows for so many years. Commander Morrison, now Colonel Morrison, attended the small ceremony where Sarah was officially recognized for her contributions to military training. In his speech, he spoke about the importance of recognizing that sometimes the most valuable personnel are those who have walked difficult paths and emerged with wisdom that cannot be taught in traditional ways. Sarah's response was characteristically thoughtful. "I never expected to find peace in teaching others about the realities of combat," she said. "But I've learned that healing sometimes comes through helping others avoid the mistakes that caused our own pain. Marcus Chen taught me to be a sniper, but this program has taught me how to be human again." As Sarah looked out at the audience of military personnel, many of whom were her former students, she saw the faces of people who would carry her lessons into situations that might determine whether they returned home whole. The weight of that responsibility was significant, but it was also profoundly meaningful in a way that her previous work, despite its importance, had never been. The story of Sarah Elena Vasquez had come full circle from the shadows of classified operations to the light of acknowledged expertise. Her journey from a traumatized operative, hiding behind maintenance schedules, to a respected instructor, helping others navigate the psychological challenges of military service, represented more than personal redemption. It demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those who have survived the darkest experiences and found ways to transform their pain into wisdom that serves others. Colonel Morrison often reflected that his decision to investigate, rather than simply report Sarah's deception, had led to outcomes that benefited not just her, but countless military personnel who would receive better training because of her expertise. The woman who had once cleaned weapons in solitude had become a teacher, whose influence would extend far beyond any single shot she had ever taken in combat.